Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here for this press conference today. And what we'll be looking at will be our interim report on the second part, as it were, the election. As you know, we produce a final report about 2 months after the final results and the court cases are finished. So, we're all aware that on the 31st of March, the people of Sierra Leone cast their votes to elect their future president in this, the fourth election since the end of the civil war. People came in large numbers, showing their will to strengthen the democracy in the country and make their choice for the person to be the next president for all citizens. Time and again we've heard from people across society and across the country that what we want is peace, we want to live our lives. And it's to be hoped that this election, successfully concluded, will mark a further step forward in this country's progress. On election day, the EU Election Observation Mission had over 80 observers out in the field across the country. And I want to take this opportunity to thank our observers for their diligence and their passion for democracy. They assessed the election day as peaceful, transparent, and credible. They followed the electoral process in about 390 polling stations overall, observing the opening, the voting, the closing, the counting, and its credibility, and dividing the country with harsh speeches and references to tribalism. With regard to the NEC, all of the major political parties, at one point or another, alleged unspecified vote rigging in the first round without presenting genuine evidence to support their claims. Furthermore, the district election officers from 3 districts were questioned by police. 6 NEC employees were detained without charge beyond the 72 hours permitted by law. Additionally, letters which could be seen as interfering in the constitutionally protected independence of the NEC were sent by the Inspector General of Police and the Attorney General and Minister of Justice on the eve of the election. The APC began to strongly object to tallying in the 5 regional centres rather than in the 16 districts, only after the results from the first round were published. A press conference by the APC on the 17th of March, in which demands were made which would in effect have delayed the runoff election, was followed by nearly identical demands sought in a court case by an individual who's also a former APC aspirant candidate. A High Court injunction preventing the NEC from conducting preparations on an already tight timetable for the runoff election was granted just 3 days before the initial date of the election, and then lifted 2 days later, which was disruptive of the process and gave the erroneous impression that there were fundamental problems with the NEC's operations. Despite these attacks, the NEC managed to maintain its independence and performed its duties in a professional manner. A number of procedural improvements were introduced as lessons learned from the 7th of March election, and the NEC also demonstrated a willingness to accommodate, within reason, changes to the tallying arrangements proposed during the negotiations between stakeholders. We commend the Commission for all of that. And I would also like to pay tribute to the work of the leaders of the other international election observation missions for their work in trying to keep the electoral process on track on this issue. And we also want to congratulate civil society. Civil society is strong in Sierra Leone, and we applaud them for the constructive role they played in reminding the political parties of their responsibilities in a democracy. Because the number of intimidatory threats towards campaigners and voters increased significantly, and there was at times an inadequate response from the security services. We want to in particular highlight 2 aspects in relation to civil society. Firstly, the role that faith, interfaith bodies and the Association of Journalists, amongst others, played in seeking to quell the tensions of tribalism. And secondly, the important role played by domestic election observers, as well as several situation rooms, such as the Women's Situation Room, in monitoring and supporting the election process throughout, not just election day, and seeking to reduce election-related violence. Institutions also played a role, especially at district level, in bringing parties together and were able to reduce tension through mediation at times. And it's also the case that while some party elements sought to increase tension, others showed restraint in the face of provocation and made it clear that they deplored discrimination based on regional origin. And this is to be welcomed. But of course, one cannot talk about democracy without mentioning the media, and of course it is a press conference. Our assessment was that the coverage of the election campaign at this stage was low-key, but reasonably balanced in the outlets that we monitored for this stage of the process. Although the state-owned national broadcaster provided free airtime to both parties, its TV coverage remains a bit biased in favour of the ruling party. However, our election observation does not only concern how the media covers politics and whether people are informed by them about the choices that they have. Our observation also concerns media freedom. The media has to be free to report and must not be subject to violence or intimidation for doing their job. And I refer in particular to yesterday's worrying statement from the Association of Journalists. And we also want to express our concern about the as yet unexplained communications cut on Saturday night, which hindered journalists in their work, hindered the transfer of information about the election, and hindered people in their daily lives. If it proves to be a deliberate act, that is very worrying for freedom of speech in this country. We all hope that the tallying is now going smoothly and accurately, and we are observing that as the EU observation mission, and I'm sure we're not alone in observing that process. And we will comment on the tallying in our full report in a couple of months' time, as our first observation reports are only just coming in. But in the last stage of the electoral process, it's crucial that political parties and their supporters commit themselves to ensuring a peaceful outcome of the election and respecting the voters' commitment and will. The rule of law should not be politicised, and the verdict of the polls must be respected. And as a reminder, as we heard at the end of the first stage of voting, there is only one result which counts, and that's the official result, not whatever else we may be reading. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Is there any question?
We finished, so do you have any information on the way the process is carried at this present time?
Well, given that it has only just started and we are only just getting our first reports in, I think we'd rather not comment on it at this point. I think the first thing, though, however, I would want to say is that we are very pleased that it is going on, because there were points where that looked, I think, a little uncertain. That, as I said, we will certainly be observing that full process. We're well aware that the political parties are also there, and I'm hoping as well that the domestic observers are there, so that that tallying process will be transparent and that people will see how it is happening. But really, we don't want to go into much more detail at this point, partly because we don't have much more detail to go into. As I say, the reports are only just starting to come in. But we are pleased that it is happening.
Any other question?
The presence improved security but appeared to be intrusive and intimidating to some voters. What can you say about that in the next elections that will be coming up in Sierra Leone?
Okay, in terms of we were concerned, I think, at the significant presence of military and police, because, and particularly the military, because this is a civil process, the elections. And however, by and large, I think the feedback that we have had from our observers has been that they were not as intrusive and obstructive as many had feared, and that in terms of the perception of them by people at the polling stations was also not intimidating as we had, as some had led us to expect. However, I think that this is something that for the next elections, we're concerned with these ones, and obviously we'll be bringing forward recommendations about how we feel the conduct of these elections, what we feel maybe people should consider for next time round. I'm sure this will be one of the issues, and above all, clarifying the role of the police at polling stations. So everybody is well aware, well in advance, that if the police are going to be present, just what their role is and what the limit of that role is. There were discussions this time round about whether or not they would be present in the polling stations, or actually where people are voting, or in the wider sort of polling centre itself, the general sort of perimeter. And I think the general understanding reached was it would be the perimeter, not sitting there supervising the voting, as it were. Whether that was generally understood and generally the case, I think we need to look fully at the reports that we have had back from our observers. But this is something that, as I say, we'll look at in our recommendations. So maybe that's an advert for the next press conference we do in a couple of months' time when we're back, when we've got a fuller set of ideas about these are the points that we think people of Sierra Leone and the authorities should consider for the next elections. But it's a civilian process.
Any other question?
Anthony Vandy is my name, and I work for African Independent Radio. March 7 elections, in your report, you said it was free, fair, credible, and transparent. Yet still we saw political parties arguing about that result, and also an individual taking the National Electoral Commission to court. Now we are in the second rounds of the elections, or we've gone to the second rounds. You have said the same thing, that it is free, fair, and credible. So what if the result comes out by the National Electoral Commission and a party or an individual of a party says is not satisfied with that result? That is one. Then secondly, we've seen two of these big political parties have declared themselves winner. The SLPP says they have won the election. Similarly so to the APC. Are you worried about that?
I think in terms of the second question, where both parties are claiming victory, this is not unknown. In terms of elections in many parts of the world, no party likes to come out of an election and even before the formal result is declared, they're not going to come out and say that we lost this. Everybody waits or should wait for the formal result. I think that therefore the issue about the tallying being able to proceed smoothly, competently, so people are confident in that result is extremely important. Because then that is the formal result, and whatever political parties have said, that is the formal result that stands. Your question about if people here want to dispute the results, and I think we need to be clear that we haven't used the phrases free and fair. We may have said that people have been free to make a choice, but that's not the description we've made of the electoral process, the act of going in and voting. We've talked about that as being transparent and credible. And of course the process has not yet finished. That's the observations of what people were able to do in the polling stations at that point. So if afterwards people feel that there is a need to take this to court, then obviously that's people's choice. The court then has a duty to act on the basis of the law and to come forward with its judgment on the basis of the law and the case made to it. That will be the choice of the people of Sierra Leone. It is not up to us to say you shouldn't be doing that. It's not up to us to make that judgment. But we would say that legal remedies shouldn't be used to derail the electoral process when one rejects the result. If you have a genuine concern that standards were not met and that there is serious concern about the quality of that process, then of course people have every right to take that to court and the courts then decide. But that will be something for the people of Sierra Leone to decide. We are not in a position to take court cases, we wouldn't do it. We will comment on the electoral process as we have observed it across the country.
Any other questions?
This is not really a question. I'm Nimata Majek's worker, one of the eminent women of the Women's Situation Room. I just want to congratulate you for your report and reiterate that I hope in your final report you will emphasize the need to give symbols to more women. Well, I want to take this opportunity of making an announcement. The Women's Situation Room will be holding its press briefing at 2 o'clock this afternoon at the Atlantic Lovely Hotel. So I look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. Thank you.
Okay, that was a good advert. People may remember that when we did our first preliminary statement after the first round of voting, one of the points that we raised then was that, while there was a wide choice of political parties, we would also like to see people having a choice of voting for more women as well, and in winnable seats. That latter part is my comment. We didn't actually say that in the preliminary statement, and I may just have stepped outside my role there. But I still mean it.
Over there?
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Wenina Pema Kamara, working for Igbo Africa Unity 1.3. And of course, we have this allegation that is going around from one of the political parties saying that the international community is urging them to call the result as soon as possible. As European, what's your response towards that? Thank you.
I think that the people of Sierra Leone would actually like to have the result as soon as possible. As election observation missions, we are here, we observe the process. I think that what certainly the engagement made by the chief observers from some of the international observer missions to try and help move the process forward has been in the interests of the process and the election, and therefore the people's voice being heard through that election. It's not, I think, should not be seen as an attempt to try and push an election in a particular direction for any particular candidate or whatever, but in the interests of trying to find a way forward, than bringing parties together to actually see if an agreement can be made so that the people's voice can come through. So I think that is the important thing, and that in terms of the results, that what the National Electoral Commission has said is that they want results which are accurate, which are trustworthy, and if that takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of time, rather than rushing to come to a decision. But I think the people who are really pushing here are the people of Sierra Leone, not the international community. We are the observers.
One last question.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Precious Amabel Levy. And hearing from the press statement you just read out, and you made mention of the worrisome statement from the Association of Journalists, SLAJ. But today, this morning, on one of our local stations, we heard that one prominent person in this country that belongs to one of the two traditional parties made an allegation, or specifically the British ambassador to Sierra Leone, Warrington, conniving with NEC, the National Electoral Commission, in giving women to one of the political parties. I was hoping to hear that in your press statement, but maybe it's not to your notice. So what do you have to say about that, man?
Well, firstly, I'm here on behalf of the British High Commissioner. He's sitting in the front row, so you may have a chance to grab him after the press conference. I'm here for the European Union. And I mean, for us, and I think all the international election observation missions, as I've said, our goal is to have the elections that are transparent, that are credible, that bring forward the voice of the people. And for us, it is not a question about which party wins, which party loses. That's the people's choice. We're here as observers, we're not here as voters. So, in terms of, as I say, our particular views, we want a process where people have that choice, where parties have been able to campaign freely, and so that the people can then make a considered choice for the vote. But as I say, we're observers, we are not voters. You, the people, are